Hi, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, this section I'm going to explain that my housing rights violation since I've been back to the United States. So once again, I have been thrown out of Spain. All of my assets have been seized. My home, my children have been taken from me. I had to flee. I mean, I was basically a refugee. I even contacted the State Department. There's supposed to be some funds for, Americans abroad involved in these type of situations. But of course, you look for any of this stuff, it's never there. So, I stayed with some friends for a month in Baltimore. Then I stayed for 1 month at a room near the Armory. Pretty bad neighborhood, pretty crunchy room, but at least it gave me something in DC to look for a job and look for some more permanent housing. And so I got a job at 701. I'll go into my labor rights violation separately. And I, eventually found a place up on Capitol Hill. Now, the man who had rented to me, that owns the house at the Armory, it was just for a month. And so a couple days before I left, he said, you didn't pay me a security deposit, or that was the security deposit that you paid. Now you got to pay the month's rent. And I said, wait a second, don't pay a security deposit. I was here for a month. I'm leaving at the end of the month. I'm not going to pay you a year-long security deposit. I mean, what's this? 3 days before I leave, you want another payment? This is ridiculous. And some guy who previously lived there came by and he said, yeah, effectively, he's always doing this to everybody. And that's how, of course, this gets him, it generates a lot more cash that way, renting out his place like that. Of course, he gets involved in all sorts of illegal stuff. But since nobody will go after him, he's a Pakistani journalist, which, the assets seized and thrown out of the country for stuff like that. I mean, the breakdown of the rule of law is having a really detrimental effect everywhere. So I'm like, no way, I'm moving out my stuff. And he locks the door, he won't let me in. I had to even call the cops and explain to the cops he won't let me take my property out of there. And they said, what are you trying to do, buddy? No, you can't do that. And you got a problem with what, anything. I mean, they understood right away. If you got a problem with this woman, you go through the courts, which of course he wasn't going to do. So after the police showed up, he had to let me take my things. Taxi moved. It was a room with no heat. That first one was $585. The second one was $550. Tiny little room with no heat, but I mean, I only had one suitcase of clothes, and that was, I had just been able to come with one suitcase back to the United States. So that, was more than enough room. But that as well, the woman is going to look at some legal problems, because what she was doing, she's one of these welfare cases. And again, we get into, the story with her family and her mother, and obviously from an abusive, very dysfunctional family. So how it repeats itself and produces these parasites on society, because she was a welfare recipient. But what she was doing was she was renting out this apartment that had 3 rooms. And she would rent out the other 2 rooms, but in cash. She would never, give me a receipt or anything. I mean, she wrote on a piece of paper, which is not really a receipt, because I don't even think it had her name on there. So, I mean, what she was doing was she's, getting income from this. I mean, maybe not much, because she's subletting out, but I'm sure she's subletting it a little higher than what she's renting it for. And then, saying that she has no income and collecting welfare. And then she had a business walking dogs. which, you know, would be cash as well. And that's how she survived. But again, this is welfare fraud. But since nobody does anything in Washington, I mean, there's nothing I could do. Then I have to move because she doesn't like me. And even my mother came by. They were coming through town on one of their trips. When she saw the woman, she said, oh, well, okay, I got it. You know, this woman was this huge, overweight, very much overweight, lesbian. I mean, maybe that was the problem. I've had this sometimes in the forest. I have lots of gay friends. I have no problem with that. But that's not my bag, and I'm sorry you're attracted to me, and I'm not into it. Well, the same with the guys out there. I mean, you're not my bag. You're not my bag. I mean, nothing to do with your being homosexual or you not being homosexual or, you know, well, I don't care. That's your life. But I wouldn't sleep with a woman anymore. I'd sleep with a man for something. So anyway, my mom was like, oh, okay, I got it, you know, and just a real, you know, redneck welfare. And she, of course, didn't like me. So she told me to leave. And I mean, it was jealousy, you know, I'm like the trophy wife and everything that she hates in this world. So jealousy. She asked me to leave, so I found another place, which was actually good because I finally got a lease, which is really important because when you're coming, well, I'm coming back to my own country, but you know, if I was coming here, no, I didn't have, you know, I didn't have a credit rating. I'd been out of the country for 20 years. I needed to get my ID. I even had to go down and get my Social Security card that I did when I was in Baltimore to work, because all of this stuff. You know, the Social Security card, I lost many years ago, but I was living abroad. So I got a lease. That helped me because I was able to get an ID. I was actually also able to write Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton about my case in Spain as a constituent request, because then I was, you know, I had a residence, a legal address in Washington, and that was one of the first things I did. Of course, they just, you know, gave me the same BS as everybody else. I mean, ever since I've been, you know, with the constituent request on Capitol Hill, just building my case because I know nobody's doing their job up there. So I lived there for a couple years. You know, I mean, it was again a roof over my head, and it was, I mean, it was a rat. There was this hole in the ground on the ground floor, and the rats would come in. Ugh, it was disgusting, but I couldn't say anything. There was this Ghana woman who was the landlord, and I mean, you know, I didn't dare make any waves. I mean, this is what happens. You don't dare make any waves. You don't dare say anything, because if you do, they just throw you out, and then you're up a creek again. And which eventually happened with her, because what happened was you know, these houses, these are townhouses. This is on Q Street around 5th. I forget what I was paying there. It was a bit more than 500. I think it was 750 something around there. And so it's these row houses, and they were doing renovations to the house next door, and they damaged the wall. Now, she would occasionally come back and forth, staying there. That was also kind of very irregular, that the landlord would just be showing up whenever she wanted, staying whenever she wanted, because she was at Tulane. She'd been at GW. She was a public health policy PhD, another one. So also I kind of helped out with the management of the house, because she was in New Orleans at Tulane, and of course when the damages happened, you know, I communicated with her. I told her, I said, okay, this is what happened. They're doing, you know, but it's just the wall. I've done renovations. I mean, my parents had a farm. We used to do all those renovations. And then the house, our house in Spain, we did the kitchen renovations, top to bottom. So, you know, I was like, okay, well, there's no structural damage here, but there is a crack that they have to fix. I mean, they did it. They have to, that's, you know, that'll be covered in their insurance. So back and forth. And then they call it in Spanish, perito. The insurance people sent this expert to look, and I explained to him, because by this time she has a lot of things that need to be renovated in her house. So by this time she's claiming that the damage had been done to the entire house, the back of the wall, the ceiling in my room, and all of these things that needed to, yeah, effectively be done, but it hadn't been caused by the work next door. And, you know, I said, you can't do that. That's insurance fraud. No, you can't do that. This was just, I was here. I saw it. So this expert from the insurance comes. I explained to him, and he's like, yeah, you're right. You know, I said, so a couple weeks later, by this time she's come to Washington. She's not pleased at all with me because I will not lie to the insurance company for her. I said, I won't be involved. That's insurance fraud. I could get in a lot of trouble. And so could you. So I don't know what went on with this insurance expert and her. But, you know, he had come by a couple times, and all of a sudden he's done a whole about face, and they're really, 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 really friendly. And I'm like, okay, lady, whatever, you know, it's not my business. I'm not lying. I didn't get involved in anything illegal here. You know, that's between you and him. But she was angry with me, and she was going to show me. Because, I mean, she knows at the same time, everybody knows I can't find a job because I'm white, American, and an old deposed trophy wife divorcee who won't sleep her way to the top. So, you know, I can't get a job anywhere. And nobody in my family and nobody in my you know, entourage, even though I know, you know, ruling elite, not only in this country, but around the world, who know about my situation, but they're too busy with their busy lives. You know, I haven't really heard from anybody. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, believe me, this is a Machiavellian world, and I've known that. I was, you know, my mom threw me out on the streets when I was doing my debutante party at 18, and at 19, she's throwing me out on the streets. I mean, believe me, the ruling elite, Trump's family, is the status quo. That's really how things go in those families. And Foxcroft and everywhere. The rest of the world's just following suit. So, you know, she knows that I'm out here totally unprotected by anybody. Nobody's gonna use their contacts to help me, because my family's very abusive, and it's a complicated dynamic, but basically abusive families. I mean, they abused my father, but they will always, you know, they don't want this coming out anywhere. And, you know, that's, everybody gangs up on the victims to keep them quiet. So then she, I mean, this idiot woman, she didn't even have the intelligence to go through an eviction process. She just told me, and I got the emails, that she was turning off the lights, changing the locks, and then I had to leave. So, you know, I mean, I'm exhausted. You know, I'm still going through all of trying to document everything in Spain for my case, the international courts there, and doing my correspondence there. I'm starting my research as well. So all I do is either work at the IMF Family Association, where I'm working by this time, or on my computer, my little laptop, my tiny little laptops, night and day, weekends. I mean, I haven't done anything else. Everybody else has been on shutdown for the past 15 years. I haven't done anything else. And this also gets into a little bit of the problem with the narcissistic families and abusive families. And the narcissism epidemic book, and I did a presentation on that, goes into this, is that one of the problems with this narcissist, the narcissistic families and people is this entitlement, and how this is, you know, perpetuated from one generation to another generation to another generation. So they all feel entitled, and they never, you know, this gets into early childhood development. They never are given challenges with which they can develop an inner personality, and also the ability to deal with difficult situations and life challenges. You know, either they're giving everything on a silver platter, so they don't have to work for anything, or they're horribly oppressed with, you know, it's in Spain they call it the galleta tonta to the women, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it goes for different flavors from different, you know, nationalities and regions of the world, but the dynamics is always the same. This denigration, screaming and yelling and insulting, and well, there's one perfect case study that I did with my siblings at the memorial ceremony. I even told them, I said, would you please, people, look at this? I mean, this is worse than the meetings in the IMF. I was pretty damn bad. And the dynamics going on there, one of the tactics is you constantly change the subject and create chaos. And that way, you know, everybody else is just kind of like, whatever, let's just, you know, stop this. And then, you know, and then that's how the oppressor gets everybody to you know, appease them and just give in, because they just want the chaos and the screaming and yelling to stop. And this is the micro example of the dynamics at work, and you can see the same dynamics at work up on Capitol Hill or anywhere throughout Washington. I mean, the Koch brothers, that was one of their tactics, was to put all of these think tanks and NGOs in Washington, and then it's creating this cacophony, because then you've added all the narcissists and the managerialists and the bigwigs and the brown nosers and the hedonists and the golden age cocaine snorters who have retired from the cocaine snorting, but not the hedonism, and their opioid, you know, pop and pill epidemic, and their children also, who believe me, one of my favorite examples in Washington is Dwight Scharr and his son Douglas Scharr. You know, I knew him back in the 80s, and he's come to visit. And one time he showed up at my house in Brussels one time, and he said, well, when she was living here a little while ago. I don't know where she's moved to now. Because when you're an expat, you never know in your company, so if you're around. So anyway, that lady, she's from Ghana. So I'm like, you idiot lady, everything you've done, you risk to have your assets seized and be deported for something like this. But of course, since nobody's holding anybody accountable, and she's, you know, a GW, and she's the landlord and the landowner, she has all the rights, and I have none. because you'll see later, I finally say, okay, enough's enough. We'll get into the landlord, DC landlord tenant court, because this is just ridiculous. So I moved from there. So I moved in there in 2010. I think I was maybe 2012 that I moved out to Greenbelt, sometime around there. And that was through a friend of a friend, my friend's in Baltimore. She's Spanish, he's American, and she had gotten married a couple of years before I came back to the States, and had moved back to the States, and they were living out in Baltimore. She's in the real estate market. She's going to lose everything. She's this big, she's made lots and lots and lots of money. But particularly her thing was when I got back to the States, she was doing reverse mortgages. I was like, what's that? She explained to me, and I was like, oh gosh. I've been following reverse mortgages since then. This is, again, predatory banking practices. Now, yeah, she's made lots and lots of money. I think she's bought a couple of houses in Baltimore. She's going to lose her shirt, everything. When it's all going to collapse. And so a friend of hers, who's Indian, French Indian, she is, of Tamil of India, Tamil origin, which also gave, I found out a little bit more about the Tamil people and Tamil problems in that region, living there. And but her parents worked for the French government, so they also, even her parents have a French nationality, and were civil servants for the French government for their entire career. Now, one of the things that I found strange with this was, this is a civil servant, French civil servant family. I mean, you don't make a lot of money. You should be able to have a house, at the end of your career, of course. Both of her parents worked, and they had a house in India. They had an apartment in Paris. Plus, they had bought this house in Baltimore for this daughter, and given money to the son as well to buy a house. Now, the older sister, she's in Paris. Oh gosh, another story of how just a family is destroying their children. In Paris, she's a lawyer, so is her husband. Very physically abusive, the husband, and very psychologically abusive and manipulative, the mother. Now, the eldest son, they have totally destroyed. I mean, that poor boy, I don't know what future he'll ever have. And her name was Julie. She was always complaining to me about this sister in Paris, about how narcissistic and just, what a horrible mother she was, what the father, just the problems in that family. But and how manipulative and opportunistic her sister was, and I would just sit there going, "But you're not much better." And in fact, she had this some problems. I think it was endometriosis or something, and had to have all of these operations, and that's why she kept on having to extend, because she was a PhD student in Maryland, and had been a vet before that. But even under her own admission, she'd never done anything very well. So this is how she kind of got into. Her specialty was elephants from India, because I guess in the development community is Asian elephants, and her niche was in India. And she was already, I got a little, background on the infighting and the jealousy and the backstabbing and the intellectual property theft amongst all the PhDs, because everybody who came to her house, it was the same. These perpetual PhDs, they go from getting one grant to another, and really that's all they care about. I mean, it's no different than the people at the IMF or the World Bank or UN or any of these NGOs. punch the clock, cash in, and if the world's falling apart, and in the meantime, well, it's not their fault. They're doing their rah-rah part. There was one man there, an Indian, who I'm actually very interested in what he was doing. He was the only one who had the intelligence to be doing these PhDs. The others were just a bunch of, frat house, looking to have a good time and schmooze and cruise and take advantage of the life. I mean, okay, they're not in there the luxury urban high rises that everybody they're criticizing, and they think they're all progressive liberals, but they're playing the same game as the conservatives. But this one man, he was doing things. It was I can't remember. Everybody was like, "Oh, we just can't understand a word he's saying." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure. That's the problem." And he was working on like decoding type of things, but with the computer systems, but very, very, very advanced. I mean, this kind of stuff was not going to be applicable for maybe like 10, if they're lucky, a decade. But I was concerned. He explained it. I would have to get the explanation again because it was complicated and it was a bit complex. But he did do it good, and he said, "Yeah, it's like the tail of the cat in the box." And they were like, "What is this?" But what is concerning is that kind of technology into the wrong hands. If we have a totally dictatorial country by then, a authoritarian country or world by then, because this was really, they could decode, because you have, apparently there's this problem that they can't think rapidly enough. Anything that they would have to decode would take a long while. This, is a microchip, if you will, for doing that. And whoever would have that kind of technology, as I say, in the wrong hands, is concerning. So, I mean, he's in my head of who can be somebody very useful in the right hands, but extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. Very nice guy, but look at Albert Einstein, what they did with his work. So then afterwards she left the country, and I was angry because first, people, why do you do this? So she overcharged me. I think I should have been paying about $700. I was paying about $1,000 a month. Okay, maybe $800 with utilities, but max. So of course she was overcharging me, but I was exhausted, and to try and find another place in DC and go through whole process again, I was just like, no, I'll just move out there and hopefully, get the State Department to help me, somebody to start helping me, and I can get back to Spain and my children. And I'm working at ICD during most of the time I'm there. So she leaves, and she doesn't really let me know ahead of time. She's like, "Yeah, I'm leaving. You got to be out by the end of the month," because my parents are coming to stay, and they're helping me to sell the house. I'm like, come on, lady. You know the problems I'm going to be facing, and that's why I came out here in the first place. She had already tried that before when her parents had come on vacation, and I said, when I moved out here, I had asked you about this. And you had said, no problem. Now, you know, a couple years later, I got to move again. I wouldn't have come out here in the first place if that was hanging over my head all of the time. You know, that did create some rift, but, you know, I was like, God, you guys, a little empathy for what I'm going through here. Everybody, I mean, this is a friend of the Baltimore friend who this woman had come through. She had been our wedding. She knew my children. She knew everything that I had been through, the trauma, the corruption. Her brother, one of her brothers had even come to our house in Madrid one time at Christmas. I opened my home to them, and her brother takes my husband aside and say, let me give some tips on making sure that she doesn't get anything when you get the divorce. Because by this time, I think everybody knew. I mean, you go to a woman's home. I mean, she had lived in Paris when, as I say, she had known us the entire time. She had lived in Paris. She had lived in Brussels at the same time as we did. The joke was when we moved to Bogota, she was going to be coming to Bogota as well. I mean, she, you know, in my home had always been open to her. Of course, when I got the $1 million home, she's my friend. But when I'm ousted, I mean, she always had a crush on my ex-husband, always. So, you know, this woman hangs me out to dry. I've got to scramble around and quickly find something in DC. So I find this place up in Fort Totten. The girl is, they're one of the girls, it's a group home with 3 women, 3 young women in their early 30s. And one of the girls is moving out. It's $750 for the room. I'm like, okay, fine. She said, but it's going up to $900 in a month. I'm like, well, why so much big of a jump? Because that's what the landlord said. I'm like, okay, fine. You know, I am having such huge age discrimination problems. If you go on to all of these advertisements on all of the platforms, young, 20 to 30 professional wanted. I mean, it's illegal, but nobody does anything about it. Oh, I mean, believe me, I've been in the cesspool. You know, I've been working. Okay, the domestic violence industry, all of these NGOs, but ding, 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 you guys. If you don't help us get jobs and housing, we really are destroyed. You're not fixing the courts, and you're throwing us out to the sharks and the parasites who are just so happy to take advantage of us whenever they can. I mean, you know, who is a bully going to go after? Somebody who is defenseless. They have no spine, so they go after they're predatory, and they're going to go after the weakest and the most vulnerable. And the white American deposed trophy wives, one of the guys over at the IMF, Delano Radman, he's the budget director. I could do his job probably better than he does his. You know, he said, oh, black men in this country are at the bottom of the heap. I'm like, no. There's one that's even been thrown lower. I mean, this is one of the things that I've been demonstrating since I started, was that Spain, even with the best legal code in the entire world, with Constitution, their penal and civil code, where women have all the rights of the world, they have no more rights than my Indian friend, who told me back in the 80s that legally her husband could say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and throw her out on the street with nothing, take her children, everything. The only thing that she would have is the clothes on her back or anything she could carry, and the jewels from her marriage. I said, oh, now I know why you get so much gold when you get married. And she said that, you know, her husband and his family would never do that to her because they were the ruling elite and the very, very wealthy top of India. So they wouldn't do that. Well, we all know that that happens all the time in the lower classes. And that even the Sati games, you know, the widow burning games still exist. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's going on, you know, here in Washington and everywhere in the United States, in the world, because the feminist movement has actually totally degraded the rights of women and children, because they are not attacking all of the corruption in the courts and all of the problems with the legal community and the 70 to 90% negligent rates there. Until that's attacked, you know, all the laws that everybody are passing, or even constitutions and the revolutions to have the constitutions, you know, written and signed, don't mean a hill of beans. Not a hill of beans. And in fact, what I'm finding is that, like, I'm like, wait a second, you lawyers, have you all ever heard of something called a penal code or a civil code or a constitution? But let's stick with just the penal code and the civil code without even getting into a constitution or international conventions. Because I don't think so. Because every time I try, I'll say to you, but this is illegal. This is illegal. And you'll say, but there's no law against it. I just want to beat my head up against the wall and just say, have you ever heard the word penal code, civil code? These concepts were developed over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's one of the first things that you should be learning in law school, along with writs and torts and contract law. Because apparently you guys don't understand anything about it. I mean, I had never stepped foot into a courtroom before my divorce and before DC Landlord Tenant Court. And I was amazed. Just right and left and right and left. Everybody's either giving you the runaround, attitude, BS, lying to you. Oh, how they love to lie. They don't like you for whatever reason. You're uppity. They don't like the color of your skin. They don't like the fact that you're a woman. They don't like the fact that you're blonde or brunette or, you know, fat or skinny, or doesn't matter. And you have absolutely no recourse. In Spain, it's called tomando el pelo. Están siempre tomando el pelo. And this is one of the things that's getting people so angry. They just want a little respect. Where they work, you know, when they have to do their paperwork, wherever they go. And that is fundamentally what a government is there to do.